I play Feral indeed. Well, there's no denying that it has some awesome personality, and hey, it's not doing too shabby on the meters compared with many of the other specs in the game. Meaning you can pretty much do endgame content if you play your spec right. And what better way to play your spec right than with our 8.2 guide? Grab your talents, gear, essences, and rotation and much more so you can start doing some raids and Mythic Plus ASAP, starting with the talents. But before we go into the talent section, check our Twitch page. We stream a lot of these classes and we go into theory crafting and more advanced stuff, since our YouTube guides usually focus on the basics and how to start your spec progression in raids and dungeons. So follow us on Twitch for more details and ask your questions. Thank you. The first row has Sabertooth as the main option for both raiding and Mythic Plus. To be honest, there's only one real change you will be making in each type of content. The build is fairly standard, although if you do want to experiment with other options, feel free to do so. I will recommend what has been tried and tested. Second row is the utility row. Wild Charge is what I recommend you take since it has multiple applications, especially when it comes to mobility and positioning. Not to mention it has different effects in each form. Usually the utility row is up for grabs since it molds on your playstyle, and if you can use anything to 100% of its usefulness, then pick what you want. Next up, another utility row with the best and probably only real option this time being Balance Affinity. Extra range on melee attacks is something rare and very sought after in this expansion, considering the amount of movement involved for melee DPS. This talent alleviates that, and if played correctly, you might not have to move out of range at all. The fourth row is, again, yet also another utility row. Druids have long been known as the jack of all trades, and the amount of utility they can provide their party with is off the charts, with this row being no different. Typhoon will be the main option to pick here, but not the only viable in all situations, so know your battle before deciding. On the next one is Soul of the Forest. This row is an energy management row and Soul performs the best. This leaves little to choose from if you want to be efficient, since energy starvation is one of the problems Ferals are facing, so solving that issue as optimal as possible is ideal. The sixth row is the fabled 2-option row. When it comes to single target, Brutal Slash sims the best and it will be your default raiding option. All of the talents here are AoE oriented, although Brutal Slash sims the best out of all. It will also move up on your single target rotation, clearly, but we will get to that later. The AoE version, or more precisely the dungeon version, gives you Primal Wrath. This sweet baby applies rip and does modest AoE damage to all of the targets. The functionality of the talent will shine when fighting multiple targets, since applying rip on all of them with one finishing move is way too good to pass. It's not something you will want to use against one target though, so your boss damage will suffer a bit in dungeons, but not by a significant amount. The last row gives you Blood Talents. This is not the only talent top Ferals use on this row, but it's the one that performs the best and consistent. This will also alter your rotation to a big extent, as most of the last talent rows do. The increase in regrowth usage is also good for survivability, although in terms of class fantasy, it is a bit weird to heal yourself to do more damage. Even by wasting a GCD on a heal, your overall damage will be higher, so don't let that deceive you. There are other popular builds that you can try, although this one will perform the best and will stand as the basis for the rest of this guide. How good is Feral really? If you are interested in the overall performance in raids and dungeons, then Feral can take you pretty high up on the cliffs of mythic raiding. As for dungeons, top Ferals have cleared plus 19s when the number 1 in the world already reached plus 22s. If you don't plan on playing in the MDI, Feral should take you way above of the best of the world. The general stat priority follows agility at the top, meaning picking eye level when starting out as Feral will be your best bet. Follow that with crit, then mastery, and lastly versatility and haste are tied on the last row. Getting more gear in terms of azerite traits, trinkets and such will change your overall stat weight. Not to mention, simply getting a lot of one stat will make it less valuable in the face of the others. If you want to min-max your character, go to websites like raidbots.com and sim yourself. You can do it for more than just stats, and in this expansion is the only realistic good thing to do. These are my stats as an example, and as you can see, agility is all the way to the bottom. My azerite traits and trinkets are pretty crappy, and I am 431 eye level, so I have agility to spare, but shitty secondary stats, which is why I will have to gear up differently than the norm. Once you get a grasp of what stats are better for you, you can be more selective with the trinkets. There are those that simply provide you with boost to a specific stat, which shouldn't be too difficult to pick. There are also trinkets with a more nuanced effect, and thank God for that. You won't always have the best of the best, but aiming for them will be worth it. As such, the first trinket to aim for will be the Ashvane's Razor Coral. This is a massive crit boost and is a must for any DPS favoring crit, and also for a few that don't. That's how good this is. This one, as well as the next, drop from the Eternal Palace raid, specifically from Lady Ashvane. Orgazoa, however, will drop the Dribbling Ink Pod, which is another interesting one, and more than that, it works nicely with the previous trinket you saw. This bad boy pops a big damage kick when the target reaches a low HP threshold, and if you time it with your Ashvane for a lot of crits, and if it crits, it will deal damage close to 500,000, well over 4% of your total boss damage overall, so good! Lastly, a more dungeon-friendly one, Harlan's Loaded Dice from Freehold. This is an overall stat boost that will never fail you. From here on out, use whatever trinkets you have, provided you respect your stat priority as much as you can. Moving on to the traits, it seems the build has rounded up a bit since last patch. There are two main traits that you want to stack as much as possible. Every other slot left you can fill with most of the other traits Feral has, but it will be difficult to recommend since it's different from character to character, so either you sim your filler traits or pick what you like. The first main trait you want is Tiger's Fury. This one supplies you with a decent amount of crit and performs the best in single target. The second one is Wild Flesh Rending. This one performs almost as good in pure single target, but a lot better when there are more enemies to fight. Both are essentially the most sought after and used traits and stacked in various combinations, but stacked nonetheless. For secondary traits, Unstable Flames and Overwhelming Power will perform the best in both raids and dungeons. The crit trait should be fairly self-explanatory. The haste one is good simply because of the amount of haste uptime it provides, even if haste is not the best secondary stat, that's how good that is. Lastly, for the defensive trait, having resounding protection is always a solid, if not the best choice. Every 30 seconds the shield resets, and if you manage to stack it 3 times, you can be looking at a 50k HP shield that heals up every 30 seconds. Very hard to beat. Lastly, let's move on to the essences. As the season progresses, the best essences are becoming more and more clear, but there is still room to wiggle. Although the guide presents you with a specific build for raid and another for dungeons, you can play with the options and see what works best. For now, when raiding, take Condensed Life Force as your major essence. This one should be fairly simple to obtain by simply raiding, and if you have been doing so since the raid opened, you probably have it maxed by now. Your first minor should be Lucid Dreams. I did mention before that one of Feral's glaring weaknesses is the energy regeneration, and this essence helps with that. Lastly, if you have your neck leveled, take Conflict and Strife for the versatility as your second minor. This setup is good for raiding, but also for single target focused encounters. If your dungeon group needs more boss damage, feel free to use it in mythics as well. The same argument can be applied to the dungeon build when raiding. The major essence here will be Focusing Iris, again, ideally at rank 3. The first minor trait will be Memory of Lucid Dreams, again for the same arguments, more so in AoE. The last minor slot is Malleable. Top Feral seems to be playing around with about 4 or more different essences and still rank best in the world. I recommend you put in your best trade left, or simply sim yourself once again. Before moving on to the rotation sections, make sure your notifications are enabled for our channel, even if you are subscribed. Yes, we're doing this again because algorithms, search engines, and optimizations, and some other words Marcelian said that sounded really smart when he did it. But all I got is, Bell is good. The opener isn't complicated, but it is specific because of your build. Start by casting a normal regrowth on yourself for the Blood Talents buff. Follow it up with Berserk and Tiger's Fury, followed by Prowl. You do this before pulling the boss. Once pulled, rake the boss and do a quick rip. Shred until 5 combo points, then use Ferocious Bite. The opener is meant to take full advantage of the amount of buffs you put on before the pull, since your bleeds will be applied as Empowered or Snapshot. The reason you do a quick rip is because you want it buffed with Blood Talents, and by the time it falls off, your Ferocious Bite will refresh it. For the normal priority, cast Regrowth when at 4 or 5 combo points to get the Blood Talents buff. Tiger's Fury and Berserk should be cast on cooldown. Make sure your target has Rip or reapply it in case it fell off. Ferocious Bite next to make sure your Rip doesn't fall off. Don't let Rake fall off. Use Thrash for the debuff and the Azerite trait. Use Brutal / next. Fill in with Shreds. The Blood Talents buff should ideally be used for a finisher always, and if you can, Rake. You can either use Rake at 4 combo points after you enable Blood Talents using the second charge on the finisher, or use the first Blood Talents on your finisher and the second on your Rake. Do this depending on when your Rake is close to expiring. When playing in an AoE environment, the rotation is similar if not simpler. Maybe not simpler. Regrowth is still used just before a finisher for maximum effect, and Tiger's Fury and Berserk are still used on cooldown. You will replace your Rips and Ferocious Bites with Primal Wrath, especially if you don't have a priority target to take down. You want to keep Rake on as many targets as possible. Keep the Thrash debuff up and use Swipe to generate combo points. For AoE, it's different depending on the number of targets and your haste levels. I sometimes generate a full set of combo points with only just applying Rake and rarely having to use Swipe at all. The consumables will follow your stat priority, which should almost always favor crit. If that changes, adjust your enchants and such accordingly to make the most out of your little lion. A Cord of Critical Strike and Deadly Lava Lazuli will be your most used consumables for rings and sockets alike. Agility is simming very poorly for me, so I cannot in good conscience recommend the appropriate gem, especially since in 8.2.5 it will be nerfed. The weapon enchant by default will be Force Multiplier. The difference will not be major, even if my sims tell me to use the crit only version. Your beverages of choice will be the Greater Flask of the Currents and Potion of Unbridled Fury. Tried and tested as the best DPS options, especially for single target. Lastly, eat only McDonald's and your numbers will be as fat as they can be. Too much? I mean, it was right there, I had to. Our Patreon team is growing ever so larger, and we thank you for it, especially in these trying times when Classic is eating up our views. Thank you. And hey, if you don't see your name there, that doesn't mean we don't love you, it just means we record these videos ahead of time, so you might have pledged after we finish recording a specific guide, so you will probably be in the next one. And if you want to know what the details are for our Patreon, check below the video. Found them? Oh, you might have also found our Teespring link for our Marcelian&Online merch, dabbled with some Marcelian&Online graphics and Warcraft love. Thanks for watching the video and have an awesome day.